As Jake lay on his back in the open field, he gazed up in awe at the glowing orbs of metal and hot gas shining brightly in the night. The sky was clear for once at this time of year, the pollution of mankind seeming merciful enough to let its creators view the outermost reaches of space. Several different bug and flying-type Pokemon had flew overhead, most likely heading back to their homes as there was a slight chill in the air. Whatever clouds could be seen were drifting by lazily, not at all hampering one's stargazing. There was an air of peace that was usually not present wherever Jink went. It wouldn't have shocked him if a random Pokemon had jumped out and attacked him, but to his surprise, nothing really happened. Speaking of shocking, Jake turned his head to the right and smiled at the little bundle of joy. Laying next to Jake was his best buddy and first partner in his Pokemon adventure, a Pikachu named Volt. He had saw that she was on the edge of sleep, her eyes half-lidded and her heart-shaped tail coiled up near her face. She looked up at him and saw the warm smile that he was casting off at her. She smiled back and climbed onto his chest, curling up and closing her eyes. Pikachu? It rarely happened with his other Pokemon, but Jake and Volt had such a strong friendship and had been with each other for so long that they just seemed to understand each other perfectly. With what would have sounded like Volt just saying her name, Jake knew what she was asking. Mind if I rest here? Go right ahead, Jake said as he petted her. Jake then looked back up just in time to catch a spectacular sight. A meteor shower had begun. He watched, amazed as the chunks of extraterrestrial stone flew by, dissolving into dust in the atmosphere. The trails they had left behind were an amazing white and blue as the ice and metals had melted off the meteors. Jake couldn't take his eyes off of the beauty as he watched the rocks dance through the sky into nothingness. It was so mesmerizing and filled him with a kind of peace that would likely never be matched again. He slowly closed his eyes as sleep had begun to take him as well. A huge crash had shook both him and Volt out of their nap, as well as disturbed the sleep of several other Pokemon in the area. Jake had quickly bolted upright, holding Volt in his arms as she began to stir, somewhat annoyed. What's the big deal? Can't a girl get some sleep around here? Sorry about that, Volt, but did you not just hear that giant crash that happened? Jake had asked. She looked up at him and shook her head. He then got up, still holding her in his arms, as he caught something, quite literally, out of this world. There was a giant meteorite sitting at the bottom of the hill they were resting on. Jake was astounded, and Volt actually seemed to be coming out of her drowsiness upon seeing the massive space rock. There was a brief moment of hesitation as Jake looked down at his partner before she nodded. It seemed that they both wanted a closer look at the thing. His steps were slow and methodical as they came closer toward the meteorite and saw the numerous details. It was a grayish-brown color and seemed to still be quite hot as they heard and saw steam rising off of the rock. There were dents all over the thing, and it was speckled with some kind of burnt reddish-orange material. The two things that had unsettled them the most were that the meteor was faintly glowing the same orange as the material covering it, and there was a small crack near the top, almost as if something was inside. Jake, I don't like the look of this thing, Volt had told him. I know the feeling, he replied, feeling his legs wobbling slightly. Releasing Volt and letting her sit on his shoulder, Jake then took a few more steps forward until he was right in front of the meteorite. He slowly reached out, about to touch the thing, but Volt had tugged on his sleeve. She shook her head, worried that the space rock was either too hot to touch, or that there was something in there that they wouldn't want to disturb. Suddenly, two tendrils shot out of the meteor and grabbed Volt off Jake's shoulder. She screamed for him immediately, and they both looked up as they saw a white orb fly out of the meteor and into the sky. It then exploded, letting off what seemed to be an aurora of greens, blues, and purple lights. Mesmerized by the light show, Jake then looked down and fell backwards as he saw that something had begun rising out of the meteor, still holding Volt. It was some kind of alien creature. Its body looked somewhat humanoid and was reddish-orange, including the tendrils that had grabbed Volt. Its two other tendrils were teal. Its legs ended in stubs, and it had a purple crystal embedded into its chest. The thing that startled Jake the most was its face. It was teal like the second set of tendrils, and had two pitch-black voids that housed human-like eyes. A purple stripe ran down the middle of the face, and there was no mouth in sight. Soon, fear had released its grip on Jake, and he quickly shouted for Volt to use Thunderbolt on the creature. The Pikachu began to charge up electricity and released, while Jake backed away very quickly. The alien itself then dropped Volt before its crystal began to glow, and it had grabbed her once more, this time in a psychic hold. Volt yelled out in pain, her body feeling as if it were being slowly and painstakingly crushed in a pulverizer. Jake was about to throw out another of his Pokemon, until the extraterrestrial looked at him, the crystal glowing once again, and he soon felt himself being lifted off of the ground. He began to flail around and yell as the creature looked at him, with no sign of any expression on its face. Its eyes had glowed, as Jake heard something speed through his mind. It sounded like a series of cosmic drones and hums. Soon, he heard what could only be described as the wails of the damned, and screams of those lost to the distortion world, before it suddenly stopped. He had heard it speak. Useless. Before he could even let out another cry for help, he saw light gathering to the crystal organ in its chest. The next thing he knew, the creature fired off a beam through its torso, leaving only a gaping wound and searing organs. Jake's eyes went wide and cloudy before, a few seconds later, the alien had dropped him on the ground, leaving him to bleed out. Volt had screamed louder than ever, expelling almost all of her electricity right then and there. Surprisingly, this caught the creature off guard as it released her from its mental grip. She quickly ran up to Jake's unmoving body and tried desperately to wake him up, but to no avail. Tears had welled up in her eyes as she looked back to see the creature still standing there, with that same expressionless look on its face. Volt's eyes and cheeks burned almost red hot as she began running toward the extraterrestrial in a Volt tackle. When she was about to collide with it, it suddenly flew up into the air, leaving her to run into the meteor in which it came from, causing her extreme pain. She had looked up, only to see the creature looking down at her one last time, before zooming off into the unknown. Volt had nothing else to do now but crawl over to the now lifeless body of her best friend and cry. She had wept on and on, hugging Jake's head and closing his cold, dead eyes. As she laid her deceased friend's head back onto the grass, a cool breeze once again passed over her, and she looked up through red, teary eyes. A meteor shower had begun. On those very shooting stars, she swore to herself one final thing. I am going to kill that thing when I find it. Pokedex entry, number 386. Deoxys. DNA from a space virus mutated and became a Pokemon. It appears where auroras are seen. Deoxys emerged from a virus that came from space. It is highly intelligent and wields psychokinetic powers. This Pokemon shoots lasers from the crystalline organ on its chest.